I've been married to my wife for 8 years, together for 12. On paper, we looked solid, steady jobs, a small rented house, shared routines, inside jokes that used to come easily. I wouldn't have said we were wildly in love anymore, but I thought we were stable. Safe. The kind of couple that argues about groceries and forgets anniversaries, not the kind that implodes. The first sign something was wrong wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. She started guarding her phone like it was classified information. Face down on the table. Password changed. Notifications muted. When I asked, she snapped that I was being paranoid and controlling, which was new. She'd never talked to me like that before. Then came the late nights. Work stuff. Teen dinners. You wouldn't understand. She stopped asking how my day was, stopped laughing at the same things. When I reached for her in bed, she'd sigh like I was an inconvenience. I told myself this was just a phase. Stress. Burnout. Marriage fatigue. I wanted to believe that, because the alternative felt too ugly to even think about. But something in my gut kept tightening, like my body already knew what my brain refused to accept. The changes piled up fast after that. She started picking fights over nothing: how I folded laundry, the way I chewed, the fact that I asked questions at all. Every disagreement ended the same way, me apologizing just to restore peace, her acting like she'd won something. I felt like I was constantly on trial. Then the schedule shifts got weird. She'd leave early, come back late, and somehow always had a story ready before I even asked. If I did ask, she'd roll her eyes and say I was obsessed or looking for drama. One night she came home smelling like a cologne I don't own. When I mentioned it casually, she laughed and said it must have been someone at the office elevator. She didn't even hesitate. That scared me more than if she had. The intimacy disappeared almost overnight. No kisses goodbye. No casual touches. Sex became rare, rushed, and empty, like she was checking a box. When I tried to talk about it, she accused me of only caring about my needs. I started doubting myself. Wondering if I was the problem. If I'd somehow pushed her away without realizing it. But the worst part was the feeling of being replaced without being told. She'd smile at her phone in a way she hadn't smiled at me in months. And every time I saw it, my chest tightened just a little more, like something inside me was cracking and I couldn't stop it. I didn't go looking for proof. I want that clear, even to myself. I wasn't snooping, wasn't plotting, wasn't trying to catch her. I was still clinging to the idea that if I didn't name the thing, it couldn't hurt me. The night everything shifted, she asked me to grab her laptop from the living room because her phone was dead and she needed to check a work message. The laptop was already open. A chat window sat there, glowing like a warning sign I couldn't unsee. Her name wasn't in it, but her picture was. His name was right at the top, followed by a heart emoji. I froze. I told myself not to read it. I read it anyway. It wasn't explicit, which somehow made it worse. Inside jokes. Complaints about me. Lines about how things are complicated at home and how she finally felt seen. There was a message from earlier that day: I wish I woke up next to you instead. My hands started shaking so badly I had to sit down. She walked in while I was still staring at the screen. For a split second, her face drained of color. Then it hardened. No panic. No shame. Just irritation, like I'd caught her in a minor inconvenience. "What are you doing?" she asked, sharp and cold. In that moment, denial died. Not slowly. Instantly. And I knew deep down, without any doubt, that my marriage wasn't just struggling. It was already bleeding out. I asked her who he was. My voice didn't even sound like it belonged to me, flat, almost calm, like my body had shut something off to survive. She didn't answer right away. She sighed, rubbed her temples, and said I was overreacting. Told me it was just a coworker. Just talking. Just venting. She said if I hadn't been so distant lately, she wouldn't have needed someone to talk to. That one landed like a punch. When I pointed at the messages, at the heart emoji, at the line about waking up next to him, she laughed. Actually laughed. Said I was taking things out of context. Said he was going through a rough time and she was being supportive. The confidence with which she lied was terrifying. No stutter. No pause. Like she'd rehearsed this. I asked her directly if she was sleeping with him. She snapped back that my question was disgusting. That I was projecting. That if I kept accusing her, that would be the thing that destroyed our marriage. Somehow, I was the threat now. The argument escalated fast. Voices raised. Doors slammed. She grabbed her keys and said she needed space because I was being unstable. Then she walked out at nearly midnight, leaving me alone with her laptop, her lies, and the echo of my own heartbeat in the house. I sat there for a long time after she left, staring at the empty doorway, realizing this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a strategy. And I was just starting to see how deep it went. She didn't come home that night. No text. No call. Just silence that screamed louder than any confession could have. By morning, my shock had burned into something sharper. I went back to the laptop, not proud of it, but past caring. What I found erased any remaining doubt. Photos. Not explicit, but intimate enough. Her in a mirror that wasn't ours. Her wearing a shirt I thought she'd lost months ago. Messages arranging work trips that lined up perfectly with the nights she'd disappeared. The timeline in my head rearranged itself, and suddenly every excuse she'd ever given snapped into place like a sick puzzle. Around noon, she finally texted, "Needed space. Don't start drama." That was it. No explanation. No apology. Just another command. When she walked in later that day, she acted like nothing had happened. Kicked off her shoes. Asked if I'd eaten. The normalcy was surreal. I told her I knew. Not suspected. Knew. I mentioned the photos, the trips, the lies. That's when the switch flipped. She got angry, really angry. Accused me of invading her privacy. Called me pathetic for digging. Said if I'd put half that energy into being a better husband, maybe she wouldn't have made mistakes. She finally admitted to the affair, but framed it like an inconvenience, not a betrayal. Just something that happened because our marriage was already dead. I realized then that the truth wasn't going to come gently. It was going to be dragged out of her, piece by piece, and every piece was going to hurt worse than the last. After she admitted it, if you can even call it that, the house felt different. Heavier. Like the walls were pressing in, forcing me to sit with the reality I'd been dodging for weeks. She talked in circles, half confessions wrapped in excuses. It was never her fault. It was stress. It was timing. It was me. Somehow, it was always me. I didn't yell. That surprised her. I just listened while something inside me went quiet. The anger came in flashes, but mostly there was this deep, hollow ache. I kept replaying memories, holidays, random Tuesday nights, the way she used to fall asleep on my shoulder and wondering which of them were already lies at the time. She told me it wasn't that serious, that she could end it whenever she wanted. Then, in the same breath, she said she wasn't sure she wanted to. The contradiction hit hard. I realized I wasn't fighting for my marriage anymore, I was fighting for basic respect, and even that felt out of reach. That night, I slept on the couch. Not because she asked me to, because the bed felt contaminated with secrets. I stared at the ceiling until morning, feeling grief settle in. Not just for the marriage I was losing, but for the version of myself that trusted her completely. That guy was gone, and there was no undoing it. The numbness didn't last. It cracked open the next day, and what came rushing out was rage. Not explosive, not cinematic, cold and steady. The kind that sharpens your thoughts instead of blurring them. I started asking real questions. How long? Where? Who knew? Each answer came late, partial, and usually only after I cornered her with something I already knew. She minimized everything. Weeks turned into months. A few times turned into I don't remember. Every correction felt like another betrayal stacked on top of the first. She grew defensive fast. Told me I was interrogating her. Said my tone made her feel unsafe. At one point, she actually said I was the reason she couldn't be honest. That was the moment I realized she wasn't sorry for what she did, she was sorry she'd been caught. At some point, I raised my voice. She smirked. Actually smirked. Said, "See? This is why." That expression burned into my memory. Not guilt. Not regret. Superiority. I walked out of the house before I said something I couldn't take back. I drove with no destination, hands shaking on the wheel, trying to understand how someone I loved could turn so cruel so quickly. Anger was easier than grief, but it came with a dangerous clarity. Staying like this would destroy me. Once the anger burned through, there was nothing left to hold me up. It hit all at once: grief, humiliation, exhaustion. I called in sick to work and sat on the floor of the shower, letting the water run until it went cold. I didn't cry loudly. I just leaked, like something cracked and wouldn't stop. The worst thoughts weren't about her and him. They were about me. What I missed. What I ignored. How long everyone else might have known before I did. I felt stupid for trusting her, stupid for defending her to friends when they joked about work husbands. Every memory rewrote itself in my head with a darker ending. She barely noticed. She moved around the house like a guest who didn't care if she overstayed. When I tried to talk about how broken I felt, she told me I was being dramatic and needed to process quietly. That phrase stuck with me. Process quietly. Like my pain was an inconvenience. That night, I realized I couldn't heal in the same space where I was being dismissed. The betrayal hurt, but the indifference afterward cut deeper. It was clear now, I was grieving alone, and she was already somewhere else. The decision didn't come in a burst of confidence. It came in a moment of clarity so calm it scared me. I was making coffee, hands steady, mind clear, and I realized I couldn't keep negotiating my own worth. I told her we needed to talk. She looked annoyed before I even opened my mouth. I said I wasn't going to compete with another man for my own wife. I said I wouldn't beg, monitor phones, or accept half-truths disguised as honesty. I asked her, plainly, if she was willing to cut him off completely and actually take responsibility. She hesitated. Just a second, but it was enough. Then she said she needed time to figure out what she wanted. That was the answer. You don't need time when you know. And if you're choosing between your marriage and an affair, the marriage is already over. I told her I was done living in limbo. That I'd be contacting a lawyer and moving into the spare room until we figured out logistics. She laughed at first, like she thought I was bluffing. When she realized I wasn't, her tone changed, suddenly pleading, suddenly scared of consequences. But it was too late. The line had been drawn, and for the first time since this started, I felt something close to control. The shift in her behavior was immediate and unsettling. One minute she was cold and dismissive, the next she was crying, telling me she'd made a mistake and didn't want to lose me. The whiplash was exhausting. None of it felt real, just reactive. She promised to end things with him. Said she'd block his number, change jobs if she had to. When I asked why she hadn't done any of that before, she snapped that I was never satisfied. The mask slipped again. Apologies followed by blame, remorse followed by anger. It was a loop. She asked if we could just forget everything and start fresh. That hurt more than the affair. Like the last few weeks of pain were an inconvenience she wanted erased. I told her trust doesn't reboot. It breaks. That night, she tried to crawl into bed with me like nothing had happened. I told her no. She accused me of punishing her. I told her I was protecting myself. We slept in separate rooms, separated by more than walls. For the first time, I saw the situation clearly. She wasn't fighting for us. She was fighting to avoid the fallout of her choices. And I was done being the buffer between her actions and reality. Living in the same house while knowing she was unfaithful was its own kind of torture. Silence became deafening. Every laugh from her phone, every casual sigh, every creak of the floorboards reminded me of what had been stolen. The spaces between us were full of ghosts, memories, lies, and what-ifs. I tried keeping myself busy. Work, running, long walks at night. Nothing helped. The loneliness wasn't just physical, it was existential. I realized I didn't just miss her, I missed the life I thought we had. The version of myself that trusted completely. That man felt dead, replaced by someone sharper, more cautious, angrier, but also painfully aware. Friends offered advice, but most words fell flat. They couldn't fix the betrayal. They couldn't undo her lies. They could only listen, and even that felt like a fragile salve. Every night, the bed felt too wide, too empty. Every morning, her presence reminded me that this house, our life, had already split in two. I began writing things down: thoughts, feelings, small observations. It helped. Not because it made the pain go away, but because it reminded me I still existed outside of her story. That I had a voice, even if it was only ink on paper. After weeks of spiraling, I realized waiting for her to change or for her to feel remorse was a trap. I couldn't let my life hinge on her honesty or guilt. Something had to shift. I started making decisions for me. Small ones at first, moving my clothes to the spare room, scheduling my own meals, reclaiming parts of the house that had become hers. I even set boundaries: no more checking her messages, no more letting her sudden moods dictate mine. Every tiny act felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I also reached out to a therapist. Talking to someone neutral helped me unpack the layers of betrayal and anger without turning it into a fight. It made me realize I didn't have to justify my feelings to anyone, not to her, not to myself, not to anyone. For the first time in months, I felt a sliver of power. Not over her. Not over the situation. But over myself. That mattered more than anything else. I could grieve, I could be angry, I could be hurt, but I wouldn't let her actions define who I became. A few weeks later, we had the talk. Not the kind where you negotiate or plead, but the one where the truth finally lands hard on the table. I told her I couldn't continue like this. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I was still angry, but because I couldn't live with someone who didn't respect me or our life. She tried the usual tactics: blame, guilt, promises, but I'd rehearsed my response 100 times in my head. Calm, firm, unshakable. I told her the marriage was over in practice, even if we were still under the same roof for a while. I explained that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and love didn't mean tolerating betrayal. For the first time, she was quiet. No excuses. No lies. Just that weird mix of frustration and fear that comes when someone realizes they can't control the outcome. Watching her finally understand that she couldn't manipulate me anymore felt like both closure and a punch to the chest. It wasn't satisfying, it was necessary. By the end of the conversation, we didn't hug, didn't cry together, didn't make promises. We just existed in the same space, finally acknowledging the truth we'd both been avoiding. And for the first time, it felt real. The days that followed were strange. Quiet, heavy, but also strangely liberating. I started rebuilding routines for myself, cooking meals I actually liked, going for long runs, reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in months. Every small victory reminded me I still existed outside of her and her lies. I sold some things she'd hoarded, rearranged the apartment to feel like my own, and even started journaling more consistently. Writing helped me process not just the betrayal, but the way I had allowed myself to stay in denial for so long. I began to forgive myself for trusting her, for hoping she'd change, and for staying too long when I should have acted sooner. I didn't expect the pain to vanish overnight. Some nights it still hit, sudden pangs of grief when I remembered moments that were already tainted. But slowly, it started to feel like the pain was mine to carry, not hers to dictate. And that made all the difference. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Not free of sorrow, but free to choose my next steps without her shadow pressing down. Looking back now, the whole experience feels like a harsh teacher. I learned that trust isn't just given, it's earned, maintained, and fiercely protected. I learned that love doesn't excuse lies or disrespect, no matter how long you've been together. Most of all, I learned that your self-worth can't depend on someone else's choices. I'm not over it in the sense that I forget what happened. But I am over being controlled by the aftermath. I've started dating again, cautiously, aware of red flags I might have ignored before. I've set boundaries that I won't compromise, and I've made peace with the idea that sometimes the person you loved can't love you back the way you need. If there's advice I'd give anyone in a similar situation, trust your instincts, don't make excuses for someone else's behavior, and remember that leaving doesn't mean you failed, it means you're choosing yourself. Pain is inevitable, but growth is optional. I'm still carrying the scars, but now they remind me I survived, and that survival is just the beginning.